When it comes to developing a game or a project, one of the most important things that you really should have when setting up your project is you should have some kind of source control system. And one of the ones that most people tend to go to is GitHub, and it makes sense. It's easy to set up, and there's not a lot really that needs to go into it. You log into the GitHub website, and you set up a repo, and everybody in your team, even if it's just you, just clones that repo and pushes their changes, pulls their changes. Everything is just easily in sync. However, GitHub is not without its flaws, especially if you're doing any sort of development on something like Unreal Engine. GitHub has given me a fair number of issues when working with Unreal Engine projects. So, one of my personal favorite source control systems to set up is Subversion. Now, Subversion is great for a lot of reasons, but one of the huge downsides to Subversion is it requires a lot more setup since you can't go to a website, set up a repo, and just have everything work. So, in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a very simple Subversion server on a Windows machine locally. So that way, as you're developing your project, if at some point you need to go back and revert back to an old change, you can absolutely do that. But before we jump into that, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more just like this one, be sure to like the subscribe button down below. And with that, let's jump right into the video. So let's go ahead and talk about what you're going to need to set everything up. So you can actually find more details about Subversion here, and I'll have links to everything that we'll be using down below if you want to go ahead and check those out for yourself. This is Subversion itself. This is where you can find more details about Subversion itself here. Now, where we're going to want to go is over here on the left-hand side, you'll find under Getting Subversion Binary Packages. And right off the bat, you're going to see a whole bunch of Linux options. Now, I won't be covering Linux in this tutorial, but if you guys want to see a Linux-specific tutorial, leave a comment down below so that way I know that you guys want to see a Linux version as well. But if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, then we start seeing Windows. Now down here, you'll see that there's actually 5 different links that you can use. Now, what I usually like to use is VisualSVN for the server. And let me go ahead and download that and I'll show you why. So if we click on that link, we'll be brought here to visualsvn.com/downloads. And we can go over here and right on over here, VisualSVN server, we can hit that download link. And that's going to go ahead and download VisualSVN for us. All right, so once we get to this point where we have VisualSVN downloaded, it's a pretty simple project. All we have to do is hit next here. Obviously, we're going to accept VisualSVN and server tools, or administration tools, my bad. And here is where we're going to want to determine where we want to set up repositories and backups. I'm going to leave these as the default locations for the time being, as this is actually being run on Hyper-V through a VM, so I'm obviously not going to be using this for long term. Hit next and next again. We can use Subversion authentication here and simply hit the install. Install should not take too long. You also get that little yes or no there. Go and close that. We got a second version of VisualSVN running there. Once it's all done, we'll get here to the finish, and I'm going to go and leave this checkbox to start the VisualSVN server manager. So we can go ahead and hit finish there and hit yes. That's going to allow for us to open up the VisualSVN server manager. And right on over here, we get a very nice looking UI, so that way we can easily set up all of our repositories. We can set up users to log in, so on and so forth. I'll only be focusing on repositories and users for this tutorial. So, first thing we're going to want to do is I'm going to start by creating a user. So let's go and create a user. I'm just going to call this something very simple. I won't be using this for actual use here, so I'm just going to give this a sample username and password. So there we go, we now have a user. So that was pretty simple. And then if we want to go and create a repository, all we do is click here on repositories, right click, and it's the same process. We create a new repository. Now this is a longer process than creating a user because it's more than just a username and password. So I usually just use the default here, regular FS repository, and then we give our repository a name. I'm just going to call this test repo, just like that. And I'm going to leave this as an empty repository. We'll be going ahead and filling that here in one moment. So we hit next, and here's where you have some more options. If you would like, you can choose what users have permissions right off the bat, so on and so forth. Since I only have the one user, I'm going to leave that as all Subversion users have read-write access. The other options are, of course, we can say that nobody has access, or we can jump right on over here into custom and we can choose what groups or what users have access to what repos. And just hit next and create. There we go. Now, once it's all done, you'll see here over on the left-hand side, we now have a nice little option here where under repositories, we have the test repo we just created. So we can go ahead and leave that. Now, of course, we now need a way to actually use this repo. So if we go back to the subversion.apache packages here, the binary packages, of course, we can see that, again, we have all of our options down here. I like using TortoiseSVN. That is my personal favorite. Now, I have seen that VisualSVN has one, so does WANDisco, CollabNet, SilkSVN. TortoiseSVN has been my favorite. It's just worked nicely for me. I've never had an issue with it, so that's usually what I like to go to. So you just go and follow the paths to the downloads for TortoiseSVN, and once we get there, you see it's getting its download. This should be a much quicker install. All right, and there we go. We can go ahead and hit next, and I'm just going to go ahead and next through all of these installs and everything. Of course, going to hit yes there. TortoiseSVN, again, should be pretty quick to install. I'm going to delay the reboot. Just go ahead and hit OK. Now, TortoiseSVN does suggest a reboot. I found that even if you don't reboot, you can still use most of the features, if not all of them, just fine. So just kind of take that as you will. I would, of course, recommend restarting since TortoiseSVN does recommend a reinstall or a reboot. So take with that as you will. And now we can go ahead and hit finish. Again, it's going to tell you that you should reboot your computer. I'm going to go ahead and ignore that for the time being. And what I'm going to do is come right on over here into File Explorer. And let's go ahead and find a place to clone this repo to. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into Documents, and let's just go and put it right on over here. Now, if you right click, you'll see there's an option here for TortoiseSVN. What we're going to want is Checkout here. It's going to allow for us to clone that repository. And if we look right on over here in the VisualSVN server, you can see here we have a URL for us to use. So this is the URL that we're going to want to copy here. So I'm just going to go ahead and retype this. Give me 1 second. All right, there we go. So now we have the URL on there. We can look at both those. We can see that this right here matches the URL that we have right on over here. And of course we have options to, again, modify where we want to check out this repository to. It says checkout is basically the same as cloning if you're familiar with Git. I'm going to do fully recursive. If we had anything in this repo, this would allow for us to copy everything in there. As of right now, this repo is empty, so there's nothing that's going to be copied. And then, yeah, so we can go ahead and hit OK. And it's going to ask for the password. You're going to want to put in that same user password, or if you have multiple, you're going to want to enter your username and password. So let me go and put that in. Okay, and obviously you have an option to save authentication. That is up to you, and then we can hit OK. And you'll see that'll create that folder, and again, like I said, there's nothing in here at the time, so I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to create real quick a new text document that we can go and save in here, and I'm just going to call this test text doc. I won't put anything in it, but just as a proof that everything is working, we can go ahead and head on over to TortoiseSVN. As you can see, if we right click under TortoiseSVN, we have a lot more options here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit commit. And again, if you're familiar with Unreal Engine, it's the same exact thing. We hit the checkbox on what we want to commit. And all we're going to do is I'm going to give this some random name, sample commit. Just something simple that I can easily remember, and hit OK. All right, now obviously this is going to go ahead and commit. It's going to list out everything that it's committed, of course. And obviously if you have more things here that you're committing all at one time, this will take a lot longer. You'll get a little loading bar and it'll just tell you when it's all done. And it's also going to list completed at the very bottom as well. Now, revision is also the number for each commit, so this should be incrementing each time we do a new commit. And that is something that we should keep in mind in case we ever want to revert back. That's just the name, that's just the number given to that specific commit. Now, if we want to go ahead and check to make sure that this all committed correctly, we can go ahead and just check out this same repo again. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and do this in the desktop real quick. It shouldn't really matter where you commit it to, just so long as it is committed, just so long as you're putting it somewhere, of course. So I'm going to go and right-click TortoiseSVN, check out, and as you can see, the URL automatically goes in once again. So we have that exact same URL again, and obviously fully recursive, and we hit OK. We'll get this checkout finished. It's going to be basically the same prompt as when we committed, and we can close that, open up this folder, and you now see that we have that same file. Now, if we also want to confirm as well through the server itself that everything is committed correctly, you'll hit this refresh button right on up here. Just hit refresh. You can also look, it's going to say we now have one revision there. And we can also look on over here, see what files are in there, and hit this little drop down as well if we want to go through them. Obviously, there's nothing in this document or anything, so it's not super important or anything, but that gives us a pretty good idea that everything is working correctly because the server sees it, we're able to reclone to new locations, and everything just works exactly as expected. Now, if you want to use this in Unreal Engine, the process is, again, pretty simple. So as you can see, I'm opening up Unreal Engine at this moment. I've already cloned the Subversion repo over here, so there's nothing going on over there. Now, in some cases, if we go down here to the bottom right, you can see that it did automatically pick up the source control settings. I'm not entirely sure on what gets that to trigger. Sometimes it won't, sometimes it will. I'll show you how to connect it manually in case it didn't. Now, in Unreal Engine 5, the source control options are down here in the bottom right. If you're in Unreal Engine 4, it's going to be somewhere up here in the top of the toolbar. I believe it's also dropped down as well. So if we go into here, I'm going to disconnect for a second by just hitting change source control settings. Now this is what it should be like for the most part. I'm going to disable. This is what it should look like when you're first booting in right here. And what you want to do is you want to hit connect to source control. And right on up here, you'll see that it'll list the 4 different options that you have for source control systems. We have Subversion, Plastic, Git, and Perforce. Now, obviously here we're using Subversion, so I'm going to set up Subversion. I did copy the URL of the repo. This is the same exact one. And again, we're going to want to log in, password. Let me go and hit that in. There we go. And we shouldn't need to do anything else. I don't think there's anything that needs to happen down here. I believe that's just a log. And then we can hit accept settings. And assuming that everything was put in correctly, you should see a little change in icons. I believe in Unreal Engine 4 that icon changes as well. I believe it also shows a checkbox similar to this one. And yeah, everything is working just fine. Now, if we want to use this, we can go and hit submit content. And as you can see, that's going to bring up everything here. So let me go ahead and we're just going to use this as a sample here. So let's just say test commit, hit submit. Now this will likely only submit the U project. I'll show you how to add the rest of them as well. So as you can see, it said submitted version 3. And if we go back into here, here's the VM. Then under test repo, if we hit that refresh again, you can see that we now have that U project file just as we're meant to. So minimize that down again. Now, let's say we wanted to put all of our folders into the repo. Now, that's also a pretty simple thing to do as well. All we're going to do is right-click, and right on over here, we can set mark for add. just go and click that. I'm going to do it on content. I'm not going to do it on all because I don't want to add in engine content or anything like that. And you'll see we get a whole bunch of things over here in the log. Let me go and actually minimize that for a second. And then we can hit source control. Again, submit content. It's going to bring up that same dialog box once again. Only this time you can see as we scroll through, it now has all of our content listed. Now you will have to do this obviously for the first boot. You'll need to add in everything that needs to be committed. I'm only going to worry about the content for the moment since we're focused on Unreal Engine here. And I'm just going to call this content submitted. And this might be a bit of a longer process since we're adding in a lot more stuff than we have in the previous couple of commits. All right, so finally it's submitted version 4 or revision 4. And again, if we jump back on over here, we can hit that refresh again. Now we can see that whole content folder is in there and we can go through everything one at a time. Obviously here we have, for example, our various U assets for the pawn. We have our projectile, pistol, our grab component, small cube, and the list goes on and on and on. We also have our map, of course. You can obviously go through all of this and everything is going to be here. Now, let's say we want to take this a step further. We want to start changing things up. We wanted to start pushing in changes, all that kind of stuff. Or maybe even we want to start reverting back and forth. So let me show you some of the basic things that you can do once you have Subversion all set up. So let's start with actually making changes. So if we come right on over here, we can go into the VR pawn, for example, and it's really not that much different. Let's say we want to come in here, all of a sudden we wanted to take out all of our teleport code here. You know, all that is gone. We're going to hit compile, save, and this will actually take a little bit longer now to save files, and that is going to be the only downside. And the reason being is it's going to ask if you want to check out an asset. So if we hit checkout selected, that's going to allow for us to now save that file. And it's also going to let you know 5 files need checked out because now we're also modifying other files as well. Now this doesn't always happen. Sometimes you don't have additional files that need to be checked out, but if you do, then that may be something that you just need to do. So yeah. Now let's say we wanted to skip that whole checkout process when we came to save. Obviously now this isn't much of a problem. If we came in here again and removed more stuff, compile and save, we'll still get that updating source control status, but we're not going to be asked to check out that file anymore. Well, we can also choose what files we check out as well. If we, for example, came over to the grab component, we could right click, source control, and we could hit check out. Now, once that's checked out, you'll see we have a red checkbox to show that it's checked out. You can also see we have one over here on the VR pawn as well. And if we open this up, we're still, again, going to get that whole delay as we go to save, but it's not going to ask us to check out or anything like we did before. Obviously, it's not that big of a deal because it only takes a few seconds longer on the first save, but then you have everything done. Now, let's say we wanted to revert back changes. Let's say for the VR pawn, for example, I removed all that teleport code and I want it all back now. Well, if I right click on the VR pawn, I can come right on over here to source control again, and I can hit revert. And I can click on that file that I want to revert, and I can hit that. This will take a second, by the way, and it's going to remove that little checkbox there, that checkout. Now, it did cause a little bit of a crash, which was a little unfortunate. If you're running in Unreal Engine 4, you shouldn't have any crashes or anything, but if we come in here again, we can see now we have our teleport code back yet again, and yeah, everything is working just fine. Again, I can go and compile, save that. It'll check out the file once again, hit checkout. Now that crash shouldn't always happen. I have managed to get it going without any crashes or anything. You can see it took the grab component a second to update as well. Source control, revert, and I can again click on that file, and then boom. So that time it didn't crash. Every once in a while you may run into a crash, but you can see now we have the teleport code back after we save that. Now I'll go and show you one more scenario of possibly having to revert back as well. So let's say, as I had just done, I had committed the VR pawn and I removed that teleportation, and oh no, maybe I didn't mean to remove that. It was something I accidentally removed with some other code. Maybe I accidentally highlighted a whole bunch of stuff and didn't mean to remove everything, and just didn't notice until after I committed. Well, there is a couple things you can do. So first off, we can open up the content browser, and if we right click on any asset, we can go into source control and we can diff against depot. I'm sorry, not diff against depot. We can right click source control and history, that was my bad. And we can see the history of any given file. So for example, this is the current version of the VR pawn we are currently on. We can go back here to the previous revision, revision 4, and this was also the first revision that this asset was added in, so it's the very first one. And we can diff against the workspace file, and if we jump in here, we can go into the event graph and we can see all of the differences between that previous version and what we removed here. Let me go and scroll that up so you can see it. You can see here highlighted is where we removed the teleport from, so this is what we wanted to get back. Now we could copy and paste it and bring it over, and that is probably going to be the thing that you're going to want to do if you don't want to leave Unreal Engine. Just copy whatever it is that you've forgotten and bring it back into the current version. Now if you want to completely go back to the previous version, unfortunately that's something, as far as I'm aware, is not capable within Unreal Engine itself. But if we close down and go to where that VR pawn is, so here it's blueprints, there we go. We can go to where that VR pawn is, and we can right click TortoiseSVN, and we may need to go into show more options. Here we go, revision graph. It did come up. And here in the revision graph, we can see the different revisions yet again for that specific asset. So this is like the very first version. As you can see, we have revision 4, revision 5. Revision 4 is what we'd obviously want, so I can click on that, right click, and I can update WC to revision, and it's going to revert back to that revision 4. And if I close that down and I go back to opening up that project once again, and when I open up this project once again, I can again navigate over to the VR pawn. And here in the VR pawn, you can see I now have that teleport back yet again. Now, Subversion obviously isn't the end-all be-all solution for everybody. There's lots of people who are perfectly happy with GitHub, and for most people, GitHub is more than enough for them and their projects. Especially if you're the only person working on a project and you just need a source control in case you need to go back, GitHub is a fantastic option for that. However, if you want to be able to host your own source control system, or you like the idea of being able to do things like lock files so other people can't mess with them while you are, and trying to prevent any sort of conflicts, and being able to do things like easily navigate around in Unreal Engine, then by all means, then that is a fantastic option. However, for me personally, Subversion is one of my preferred go-tos, as I don't mind hosting my own source control system, and for me personally, I like the idea of being able to have a little bit more control over, one, where my files are located, but two, I also have a little bit more control over how I can lock files to prevent merge conflicts if I need to work on a project with someone else. With that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like and subscribe button down below. And I also want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters. And with that, I'll see you in the next reality.